Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts about the 40K universe. I am your host Gersh1 and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today we continue with the Black Crusades as we get into the very last Black Crusade, the 13th. So let's get into 40 Facts about the 13th Black Crusade. The 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler resulted in the largest mobilization of both Imperial and Chaotic forces seen in the Milky Way galaxy since the Horus Heresy. To understand the full course and impact of the 13th Black Crusade upon the galaxy, it is first necessary to understand Abaddon the Despoiler's 12th Black Crusade, better known in Imperial records as the Gothic War. As the end of the 41st millennium drew closer, the signs that Abaddon's long-feared return came in the form of numerous sightings of drifting vessels emerging from the warp in the sectors of Imperial space surrounding the Eye of Terror in the Segmentum Obscurus. The astropathic station of Belisar Majoris was the first to report that they had detected a high number of space hulks approaching the outer reaches of Belisar and Agrippina system. The first indications were that the majority of these hulks were uninhabited, but this turned out to be wrong. In response to this alarming report, Marshal Helk, the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Guard's 2nd Army Group, ordered the deployment of additional troops aboard the 211th, 340th, and 401st Naval Squadrons, with the purpose of boarding operations on those hulks suspected of harboring life. The vessels of the Adeptus Astartes boarded those hulks that they could, but their numbers were limited, as always. The Space Marines found these hulks to be chaos-twisted and disease-ridden nightmares, and subsequently every such vessel encountered was destroyed with torpedoes and bombardment cannons, but for some it was already too late. In what could not be a coincidence, outbreaks of sicknesses erupted among many of the Imperial Navy starships' crews, within a day of a reported sighting of the dreaded Chaos starship Plagueclaw in the outer reaches of the system. As the sicknesses spread throughout the region's Imperial Navy forces, and the number of starships fit for duty fell exponentially with the diseases, even more space hulks dropped out of the warp, converging in vital strategic worlds. Ships from neighboring subsectors rushed to destroy the hulks, and a small ad hoc fleet was assembled at the vast orbital shipyard of the dead world of Belis Corna, in the sector of the same name, under the command of the Imperial Admiral Quarren. The Imperial fleet surged from port and began to hunt for the Black Claw, though they were to encounter something far, far worse. In the shadow of the Fenrax dust cloud, the Imperial fleet was ambushed by a force of Chaos warships led by the Terminus Est, the flagship of the Herald of Nurgle, the Chaos Lord Typhus of the Death Guard Traitor Legion. The battle was short and bloody, with several Imperial warships crippled in the opening salvos of torpedoes, while others were overrun by vile, diseased creatures that vomited forth the loathsome chaos sporting crafts. Admiral Quarren recovered well from his shock and rallied his forces superbly, counterattacking and fighting his way clear of the Chaos Warp Fleet's trap. Typhus did not pursue, and the majority of Quarren's fleet was able to limp back to the port at Belis Corna. The Battle of Fenrax had been a costly disaster for the Imperium, but there was much worse to come. If the situation at Belis Corna wasn't bad enough, it was made worse elsewhere. Many of the plague hulks had slipped through the Imperial defense nets, and the same contagion that had struck down the Imperial starship's crew was spreading like wildfire through the many inhabited worlds in the Cadian and Agrippina sector, as well as those of Belisa Corna sector. The hive world of Sabiaco Diablo proved to be an ideal breeding ground for the unknown plague, and was quickly quarantined by the officers of the Adeptus Administratum's Official Medica, but not before millions of people had already sickened and died. Within a standard month, a dozen other worlds reported cases of some plague, and panic spread throughout the Segmentum Obscurus, as transit between neighboring sectors was halted by the Imperial Navy in an attempt to stop further infections. As the epidemic spread, apocalyptic religious sects once more began to appear on every world afflicted with this disease, just as they did before the outbreak of the Gothic War, preaching that the Emperor's wrath had descended upon them and was a punishment for their sins of wickedness and vice. Only the truly faithful would be spared the curse of unbelief, as they named the plague, and hordes of flagellants filled the streets of every world adjacent to the Eye of Terror. The continual health of these fanatics in the face of the plague gave their words the sheen of truth, and millions flocked to hear their extreme rhetoric out of fear for their lives. The plague continued to spread, but it was on Subiaco Diablo that the true horror of the disease was finally revealed. To the shock and disgust of the planet's inhabitants, the mass graves deep in the ash plains of the hive world that contained the bodies of the afflicted heaved and split open, and the corpses of those who had perished in the plague climbed up from the lime-encrusted ground. Soon, millions of shambling corpses were advancing on the nearby hive city that they had once called home, clawing their way inside and attacking the already disease-weakened inhabitants. Within months, plague zombies were climbing from their graves on scores of worlds throughout the Segmentum, Bellis Corona, and Agrippina sector. Paralyzed by the sheer scale of the zombie epidemic, the Imperial Navy forces in these regions were completely unprepared for the vast Chaos war fleet that emerged from the warp at the edge of the Diablo system and surged into Imperial space. The Herald of Nurgle, the Traveler, Typhus of the Death Guard, had come to reap the harvest of his plague of undeath, and there was nothing to stand in his way as he claimed the worlds of Subiaco Diablo as the newest province in the Plague Lord's eternal kingdom of death. On the worlds of Malin Reach and Lilithar, Imperial rule all but broke down as the plague crippled the authorities' ability to contain the ranting of self-proclaimed prophets of the end of times, who whipped entire populations into frenzies of insanity. The ecclesiarchy had dispatched the highest officers of the imperial church to quiet the souls of the people, yet at this time of dire need, the Adeptus Ministorum had itself become embroiled in a conflict. A number of cardinals had cast their lot with those who preached that the emperor's judgment had found his servants wanting. Naval facilities and symbols of imperial rule were openly attacked, and over the following weeks, mob rule virtually replaced that of the Administorum on many outlining worlds. Overpopulated hive worlds as far apart as the Scarus and the Cadian sector erupted in violence, seemingly without cause. Charismatic demagogues incited frenzied mobs to fight the ruthless, crushing oppression inherent in the Imperium's system of rule, and hundreds of thousands answered their calls. Assassinations and poisonings herald a new era of anarchy. In key war zones, whole supply fleets mysteriously vanished. In the wake of such catastrophic breakdown of Imperial rule on so many planets in the sector surrounding the Eye of Terror, vast disturbances were sensed in the warp, stirring the already volatile medium of the Immaterium into new and violent life. The fringes of Warpstorm Baphomet expanded to engulf the edge of the Cadian system, and many of the astropaths based there reported terrible visions and bloody omens that all pointed to a time of coming war. Reports kept pouring in which indicated a horrific escalation in the scale of these disturbances. Any doubt that chaos was influencing the Imperium was cast aside following these events on almost every civilized world. Even on Cadia, the Imperium had seen signs of criminal activity. So close to the eye, the Cadians had come to expect that the taint of the warp to afflict those of weak souls, and they had learned to recognize its influence wherever it was found. In one notable incident, Lord Commissar Salin assigned a company of Keriskin to headquarters security and led a raid upon the barracks of the 92nd Cadian Regiment. He rounded up a cadre of senior officers who he claimed were in league with the agents of the warp. No evidence of this accusation was presented to the General Staff, and there was no duty upon the Lord Commissar to do so. The officers were executed. On the world of Lilithar, a powerful figure had arisen amongst the raving cults and fanatics, proclaiming himself to be the voice of the Emperor. An orator of fearsome skill, this mysterious individual had roused entire populations with his passionate speeches. Many within the sector's high command advocated the extermination of this individual, lest his outpourings lead to further unrest. However, all across the system, the backlash of those still faithful to the Imperium began. The Inquisition's Ordo Cadia, the representatives of the three Ordo in the Cadia sector, believed this so-called voice of the Emperor to be an individual of utmost danger. Lilithar was home to several thousand planetary defense force regiments, divided into 65 army groups, and it appeared that an estimate 40% of their personnel had thrown in their lot with the so-called voice. Many of these units had deserted, a large number actually making it off-world, where they had dispersed to varying locations. That the Imperial forces had lost such a body of men to a demagogue was cause for grave concern in itself, but it was enough for the high command that the Ordo Hereticus wanted him dead. Within a week, there was a great resurgence of orthodox piety amongst the Imperial citizens. As reaction against the so-called voice of the Emperor, Sector High Command had initially feared that the teachings of this heretic might plunge the region into the depths of apostasy, yet the people actually rallied against his twisted followers, casting down his prophet and declaring his false words. His days were numbered as inquisitorial agents of the throne hunted the elusive voice. The great strength of the Imperium was finally stirring. Cadia High Command ordered an attack to take place at Cadia, upon the ancient and venerated Tyro fields, so that the Imperium could begin the Emperor's work in earnest. Several systems in the Scarus sector soon reported enemy activity, as did 3 subsectors located along the Cassandra Spar. Reports also came from Fesora Prime, indicating an attack by warriors thought to be the Night Lord's Traitor Legion. The raid was timed to coincide with the local annual festival of the Three Maidens, a holy time for the population of Fenesaurus Prime and its 3 moons, during which the adherents fast and meditate upon their own weakness, the better to serve their lord, the God Emperor. Evidently, the attackers took advantage of the fact that most of the world's population were cloistered in prayer and descended upon the capital city of Medea, like a pack of feral predators upon its prey. Survivors reported that the enemies made planetfall at Medea's prime generatorium, destroying it and plunging the city into darkness before crippling the city's reserves. With the city's power grid out of action, the traitors stalked the streets, killing as and when they saw fit. It was many hours before the Planetary Defense Force could be mobilized to face the threat, although many militia units mounted heroic improvised counterattacks, all to no avail. By the time the native defense force was able to muster, the raiders had vanished into the darkness, leading a death toll of many thousands in their wake. And those were 40 facts about the 13th Black Crusade. We haven't even gotten into the 13th Black Crusade. This is just a demonstration of how horrible it was leading up to the 13th Black Crusade. It seems that each sector is going crazy with demagogues and plague and just all-out craziness. So if you guys want to keep learning more about the 13th Black Crusade, please subscribe to the channel. If you're already a subscriber, thank you for liking, commenting, and sharing. By you commenting down below what kind of videos you guys want to see for Warhammer 40K, we can continue to put out 40K videos every single day. So thank you so much. But I'll catch you guys tomorrow. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.